Hello, and welcome to NAMI Delaware's limited time video series, Going Behind the Mask. In case this is your first time hearing about NAMI Delaware, we're a nonprofit organization that advocates and supports those with mental illness and their family. We also educate our community on mental health, amongst many other things. I'm their advancement manager, and I'm bringing you hashtag Behind the Mask Mondays to open up the conversation, reduce the stigma, and teach you about mental health. I'm thrilled to announce our guest, Dr. Jessica Clemens. Dr. Jess is a board certified psychiatrist in New York City and has a social media presence of over 85,000 people. She teaches her followers about mental health daily. She recently released an Audible original called Be Well, A Guide to Better Mental Health for All. And today we will be talking a little bit about that book, specifically going over what she talks about and describes as the 6 pillars of stigma that prevent people from engaging in mental health treatment, and just having an open conversation about her personal mental health. So thank you so much, Dr. Jess, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this organization, and I feel honored to be in conversation with you. But I tell so many people about this organization and how helpful it is in finding treatment. So please keep up the amazing work you all are doing.
Yeah. So I would love to start talking about your audiobook, which is absolutely amazing, by the way. So part 2 of it is titled and talking about the 6 pillars of stigma. Can you share kind of going through them like one by one, what they are, and also how people can overcome that stigma?
Absolutely. So in creating this audiobook, I had an opportunity to talk with followers on social media and think about my experience with caring for patients, because that is what I do every day. I'm a practicing psychiatrist, and there were some themes that came up around stigma, and I think we talk about stigma a lot, but we use it as sort of a catch-all, right? Where it's the reason people don't get treatment. But in exploring it more again, with hearing from folks, I found there were 6 themes that came up for people. And I do explore this more in depth in the audiobook. But one that stood out is that there's this belief mental illness is not real. Or if it is real, it's not an issue that would affect me. It affects rich people or people who are outside of whatever group I'm in.
I've always thought that was such an interesting stigma that it's like, only rich people, or it's like, I feel like I've heard like, oh, it's like a publicity thing. Like they don't actually have anything. Like it just, I know all these different stigmas related to that.
Absolutely. And then I think, the media, which is also a contributor to one of the 6 pillars, the portrayal, right, is that it's only certain people who get to talk to someone. And so therefore I can't possibly have that. And so that is another stigma, a pillar that people experience. It's this like misunderstanding of what mental health treatment is. And I think a lot of it has to do with what people see on the media, right? Those portrayals that we often do use to understand experiences outside of our own, right? So yeah, that ties right in. One of the third I find is that there's a lot of like really big feelings around it. People feel ashamed. They feel embarrassed. So, if people are already experiencing the shame around identifying with feeling sad, depressed, feeling anxious, they're definitely not going to seek treatment, right? Why? Why would I do that? I'm already embarrassed. I'm already ashamed. So I find that is a one of the issues, or one of the reasons that there is stigma related to mental health treatment and mental illness. It's also like some people are a part of groups and have certain backgrounds that it's just still really taboo. And I explore that. I think, we talk a lot about sort of African Americans, there's a stigma, and that's why people don't get treatment. But the more we peel that back, there's so many reasons why, African Americans, if we sort of think about a cultural group, that people aren't getting treatment. And it's not just taboo, but there are many groups. Men, might be less inclined to talk to a therapist or see a psychiatrist because it's taboo. And then I think about a couple of other things briefly. lack of access, right? You might live in a part of the country where there really are no therapists for miles and miles, or there's one psychiatrist in the whole state, and that places a barrier. And it also creates that stigma, because if no one that sees someone, seeks mental health treatment, then I don't want to be the first, but a part of that stems from the fact that there just aren't enough providers. And then cost is also a part of that too.
That's one of the big ones that we see. We have a helpline, people call in asking for resources. And one of the number one things we hear is that, I don't have insurance, or insurance isn't like covered by a lot of psychiatrists. And that is definitely probably the biggest issue that we have seen people facing.
Absolutely. And so, like, on the one hand, that might be thought to be less of have less of a relationship with stigma, but it just continues to uphold this belief that mental health treatment, it's not for me. It's not something I can afford. It's not something that the group I sort of identify with even, acknowledges. So it just helps to kind of uphold the stigma around mental health treatment. So I agree. Cost is a big one, but I do think it folds into stigma.
Do you have any suggestions? I know in your book, you kind of talk about it as like investing in yourself, and how I feel like, people, if we talk a lot about too, like comparing it to physical health, and a lot of people I think would easily be like, oh, I have a broken leg. I'm going to not buy clothes for a month. I'm not going to buy anything unnecessary because I need to get this fixed. And then mental health, they could be really struggling, and just say, and I think a lot of times too, people are like, oh, well, I'll do like retail therapy. Like, it's like all these things that are like, I'll just treat myself to different things and that'll help me feel better. And a lot of people, I mean, as fun of terms those are and stuff, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'll do that type of therapy instead of paying to go to a real therapist.
Absolutely. I think what you described there, that is, one of the first steps. It's really thinking about mental health treatment is something that you're doing for yourself. Like, you're essentially pouring into yourself. And, I think a lot about, if the mind goes, the body goes as well. Right. And I don't mean this in sort of a end all way, but if you're not in a great place mentally, if you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with anxiety, if your thoughts are just really unclear, you can't really take care of yourself physically, right? You're probably not going to eat as well. You're not going to sleep as well. You're not going to engage the same. So it's so important to think about this as an extension of caring for yourself. I also think another strategy to help overcome stigma is really just like being open and talking about your experience. You don't have to be the first person in like your friend circle to say, I'm in therapy, or I can't meet with you guys for lunch. I've got, my therapy session. If that's not for you, please don't do that. But it can start with just opening up. We all ask each other, how are you doing? And everyone says, fine. But like, if you really have a moment, take some time to really say, okay, you're fine, but like, we're in a pandemic, or, I know that work's been difficult, or you're a new parent. How are you really doing? And I think that starts to open up opportunities for people to talk.
I think with the pandemic, that you brought up a great point. Everybody does have this struggle that we all can understand. We're all going through this. So I think that's a great way to start opening up the conversation, because everyone can relate. And I think something else we hear is a lot of people don't want to open up because they don't think that their friends and family can relate, and they don't want to be, misinterpreted and judged for that. So I do think that just being in the pandemic and starting off with, how are you doing with this? And then it can almost lead into talking about, well, I've actually been struggling with mental health before this too.
Absolutely. It's such a gateway into what's really going on with people. And I think it also provides an opportunity for whoever's asking to share. So you sort of model that, but also an opportunity for the person you're asking to like share the burden, right? That's a lot of what we're doing essentially, especially during these times. So I agree. There's something central this pandemic has really brought, sadly, but it's brought this collective experience that there's something challenging we're all going through.
Yeah, definitely. I know one of the other pillars of stigma that you talked about was kind of like this misunderstanding of the role of a mental health professional. And we kind of talked about it before with the media, but I think it really goes into this where people, will just sit and think that what they see in the movies and TV shows is reality, and that makes them not want to go. So can you, especially as a psychiatrist, share what it's really like to see one?
Absolutely. As much as I, do a lot of work publicly and in trying to help demystify mental health and psychiatry, there's just a lot of terrible movies and shows that portray therapists and psychiatrists to be very, strange and crossing barrier lines that are just inappropriate. So, I would say if anyone's watching that and it feels uncomfortable, just enjoy, the drama of the show, but it's not really what you're going to experience. I'm a psychiatrist, and so I practice both medication management, which is just our term for I treat with medication, like antidepressants, antipsychotics, medications to help treat common mental health conditions. But I also am a therapist. That's a part of many psychiatrist training. And I was fortunate to train in New York City. And so that's like the powerhouse of therapy. So I had a lot of exposure, a lot of supervisors. And so it's just like you go in, your first visit is often a longer visit, maybe up to an hour, and you're going to talk about why you're there. But your psychiatrist is also going to ask about your history. And that means like what other psychiatric exposure or treatment you've had. What are your medical conditions? Do you use substances? Like we're doctors, so we're really looking at the entire picture. And so sometimes people will say, I just want to get started, but we really do need to take time to get to know you. And that's even with a therapy session as well, where they're not going to focus on medication. Those early visits are really spent trying to understand and fully get as much as we can about what's going on before we start to delve into treatment.
That's great. Yeah, I think that'll help a lot of people to kind of understand have you ever seen a TV show or movie that has accurately portrayed going to a therapist?
There is one that comes to mind, and I do actually touch on this in my audiobook. The really popular HBO show Insecure. I think very early in previous seasons, one of the main characters started to go to therapy, and she's an African-American woman, professional. I think she's like an attorney, but she's struggling with like relationship challenges. And that's what prompted her, led her to go see a therapist. But the therapist had like a beautiful office. A lot of like New York City practices are like that, but not always. It can be very simple. But they were both sitting on separate couches. And sometimes that's not depicted appropriately. There was a good distance between them. So you want to sit close together, but not so close. You shouldn't be touching, limbs. And the therapist was taking notes. And sometimes they don't. It's not always necessary, but she was reflecting and listening to this character. And I thought, okay, this is a good example. If I had never been to therapy or I wasn't a psychiatrist therapist, I would feel like, okay, this is something I want to try based on that episode.
It's a great show. I've never seen it before, actually. I'll have to check it out, at least for that episode, just to see.
Gotta find it. There's so much more though. By the way, I can't vouch for the whole show. It's very popular, but it's adult HBO. So
now I do want to talk about how your mental health is. I mean, you have clearly had a busy year. You treat patients. You are a social media star. You have published your book. I mean, that is not easy for someone's mental health. I guess, how have you been taking care of it? And I think there's that saying, like psychiatrists and therapists, mental health professionals, they don't struggle with their mental health. They don't need help ever. And that is clearly a myth. So I just wanted to, have an open, honest conversation and check in on how you are doing. As someone might see it, you are, so successful, but with success, sometimes there is a lot of stress that comes with that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for checking in on me. There's also, I've heard people share things like, be sure to check on your strong friend. And so I appreciate, you modeling that here today for folks. You're right. Like all of those things are part of my experience. I also became a mother during the pandemic, and that's a whole other thing. I'm surprised we're not hearing him like run around. He's really into like running back and forth. But like hearing little footsteps. But, have continued in my own therapy, and that has really been helpful. Not only to help manage anxiety, which I've shared that I sort of developed that during, not college, during medical school. And
Mhm.
therapy really helped to keep it in a manageable place for me. And I continue it. So the more I add to my plate, the more important therapy really is, because it's not only just an outlet. It's not like I'm just there to vent, but I'm there to explore, think about challenges, also to have some of my experiences normalized. As a new
Mhm.
parent, things really can feel overwhelming. You're trying to care for this little person, but then this little person is their own person. So you can't, they're not going to do everything that
Mhm.
you kind of hope everything is an Instagram perfect. And so hearing the reassurance is really helpful, and just having that time dedicated to me. And I'm also very comfortable these days with not being so present. I mean, my social media presence certainly is not what it used to be back when I was really
Yeah.
engaging with it, and building. But I'm okay with that, because I know that what I'm doing now is taking care of my family, being there for my family, and sometimes I have to dial some things back. So practicing self-compassion has helped me a lot with just feeling, stable, and like being supportive and there for other people during
Mhm.
this really challenging time.
That's great. I mean, I think it's amazing too that to hear mental health professionals also seek other mental health professionals and they struggle too. And something that you brought up that I think is a great point is that therapy isn't just to vent. That some people, I think going back to the money thing too, it's like, oh, why would I spend money for someone to listen to me? My friends can do that. And that is a great point that, I think that's one of those misconceived things that you just go there and vent, they take the notes, and then they'll give you a diagnosis or they'll say something. So that is a great point that, there's so much more to therapy than that.
Absolutely. You are making so many connections here. That's why I'm nodding the way I am, because you're right. Yeah, I don't want to sort of rehash what you've said, but absolutely, I would agree with everything you've shared.
All right. So the last thing that I wanted to ask you, you did talk about, your go-to is kind of self-care. Do you have a favorite affirmation or anything when you're mental health? And you don't have to, it's fine.
I
But
do
is there
though.
anything that sticks with you or you tell yourself when you're struggling?
I absolutely do. That's why I'm smiling. I do. Affirmations is a really important part of what I try to share, like in my conversation series. I try to get people really engaged with just developing a personal mantra. And so mine is one that I've had most of my life. It's really simple. It's just, life is good. And I refer to that, or I lean on that when things feel overwhelming, or if I start to get really bogged down, or I'm comparing myself to someone else. I've spent too much time on Instagram, and I'm like, my life is, should be better.
Yeah.
I really say this to myself, and I remember life is good. The fact I have it, the fact I can show up today, and that really helps me to stay grounded, and just kind of, in those times, just recenter. So
I love
that's my
that.
go-to.
It's a great explanation of it too. I like that a lot. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. So to wrap up, is there anything else you want to tell, our viewers right now? How can they find you on social media? How can they get your Audible book? Tell us all the ways that we can connect with you.
Thank you. So yes, so I again appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I think what I do like to remind people always is that this is a difficult time we're in, but it's okay to seek help. It's absolutely, I would encourage you to seek help if you're dealing with any mental health challenge, or just wondering about it. Your job isn't to figure it out on your own, right? Go see a professional. We're happy to be there. This is the work that we do. We love it. And so that would be I would really want to encourage that
That's great.
to anyone today. And then to get in touch with me, I do spend time over on Instagram primarily. Ask Dr. Jess. I'm also on Twitter, and I'm doing a few Facebook live audio rooms. I'll have one coming up. And then in terms of like my audiobook, people can check it out on Audible. It is an Audible original. And it was actually just added to the Audible Best of 2021. So I was
Wow,
really pleasantly
that is
surprised.
impressive. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm like, okay, great. So I mean, that tells me that when people listening are really finding it to be helpful, and that's why this audiobook was created. I really want to help people to just have
Mm.
something tangible to start the process of
Yeah,
learning mental
I
health.
I
Yeah.
can vouch it is great. It's an easy listen, I will say. I feel like it's just like, I don't know, even part of like my night, like just some self-care, like listen to a couple minutes, feel good about yourself, focus on your mental health. I like that it is, an Audible, and they're also becoming so popular, but I like being able to listen and do some other things at the same time.
That's why I really was excited to work with them for that
Mhm.
reason. And also thank you for that feedback. And I think when people are going through anything challenging, especially mental health struggles, the last thing you want to do if you're like depressed is try to pick up a book. Sometimes people can't, they can't
Yeah.
really concentrate. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's also one reason that I chose an audiobook. I want you to just be able to listen, go back to it, but really have some tools. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for being here. This was amazing. I really enjoyed my time. So take care.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Before you exit, I have a short message from NAMI Delaware, and that is you are not alone. There is help and there is hope. We are encouraging you not to hide behind your mask this holiday season, instead, to talk openly and honestly about your mental health. We talked a lot about finding different resources and how to find a therapist good for you today. And I just wanted to let you know that if you do live in Delaware, NAMI Delaware has a helpline. It is not a hotline, it is not for if you are in crisis, but it is more of a resource line. We provide you with different resources. If you don't know where to go, but you need help, you don't know what your insurance covers, we are here to help you find the right care and support that you need.